Welcome back to Interpreting Turnitin Originality Reports tutorial. In this video, we will go through some examples of Turnitin reports which have highlighted areas that do not contain plagiarism. So let's get started. So first we're going to get started by looking at some examples of Turnitin Originality Reports. Since it's a little bit easier to interpret areas that are not plagiarized, we will look at non-plagiarism examples first. But the first step in interpreting Turnitin reports is to look at each and single highlighted area and evaluate it to see if it was plagiarized or not. So to determine if you need to make corrections, you start by reviewing the highlighted areas, and let's say that this is the first area that we see. Now you see that in this example we have the pop-up window open up top, and in the pop-up window, as we've reviewed in the previous video, you can see the highlighted area within the matched source, within the original text. If you wanted to open up the link, and you can go to endocrinesurgery.ucla.edu and see this actual source. But if that's of no interest to you, you can close it by clicking on this little X here to exit the pop-up view. That way you have an uninterrupted view of the rest of your paper. So if you open up these pop-up windows, make sure that you close them so that you can review all of the areas that are highlighted. So now let's concentrate on this area labeled with number 4. Now remember, what we look at is we're looking for plagiarism, and we said that there are two types of plagiarism: word for word and paraphrase plagiarism. Word for word plagiarism is when you have an area that is highlighted without quotation marks and without citations at the end. And then paraphrasing plagiarism is when you reword the original source, but you don't have in-text citations to give credit to the original author. So if we look at this area, we can see that there are about 3 sentences highlighted, and all of that is highlighted with the exception of a couple of words. Now, you may think that this might be plagiarism, but if you look really closely, you see that there are quotation marks at the beginning and at the end of this section, and also you can see that we have in-text citations here. So, is this area plagiarized? No, it is not, because the student has used quotation marks to indicate that this is word for word from the original source, and the student also provided an in-text citation. So this is an example of non-plagiarized material, or area that is non-plagiarized, in the highlighted section of Turnitin. So let's look at some more examples. In this particular example, we have the highlighted area labeled with number 10, and if you recall that the definition of plagiarism, word for word plagiarism, is 7 or more words in a sequence, and we compare that definition, we look at this area, we see that we do not have 7 words or more words in sequence. We see that this particular highlighted area is broken up with a couple of words here and there. Okay, so now, is this word for word plagiarism? No, it is not, because the student has put in some effort to paraphrase this particular sentence, but they have not done such a good job. So while this is not plagiarism per se, because they did paraphrase it a little bit, this statement is in need of improvement. So it needs to be changed a little bit more. It needs to be better paraphrased. Another reason why this is not plagiarism is that we see in-text citations right here, although not properly formatted, but nevertheless we have a citation with which the student is trying to give credit to the original author. So this is an example of non-plagiarism, because we do not have 7 words stringed together, and although there's no quotes, the quotes are not necessary here because the student did paraphrase somewhat. But again, this statement is in need of editing, so it needs to be better paraphrased, or the paraphrase needs to be improved. Now let's move on to the next example. In this example, we have several scattered areas of highlighted material, and some of them are only a couple of words long, so we are not really concerned about that. But if you look at the area marked with number 3, right here, okay, we see that there is more than 7 words and there's no quotation marks. But this particular area is in parentheses, which is indicating that this is our in-text citation. So this is where we're giving credit to the original author. So in this case, the author is an organization. It's called United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. So we cannot really paraphrase this, and we cannot put it in quotation marks because it is an organization. It's an author, right? Now you may ask, well, why did it get highlighted then? Well, this particular organization was most likely mentioned in other publications or other student papers, so it was matched in the database. So Turnitin had this particular author somewhere in there, and it just matched it, so it highlighted for us. So we do not need to make any edits, and we don't need to make any changes. Next, let's look at another example of non-plagiarized highlighted area in a Turnitin Originality Report. In this particular example, we have a highlighted area that has quite a few words in it, much more than just 7 words. And remember, that's our definition of plagiarism. We're looking for word for word. But this is not a plagiarism example because this is an actual quote, and long quotes are formatted using APA style by indenting the text, and you can see how this whole area is indented in comparison to the paragraph or to the sentence above. You also omit your quotation marks, and then you use in-text citations as you would with any other quote. So if you, this is something that you would learn if you used Purdue Online Writing Lab resources, and if you had a really long quote, then you would format it like this. So if your quote exceeds 40 words, then you need to utilize this type of referencing. Now, I'm mentioning this because I just want to make sure that you understand if this becomes highlighted and you forget that this is an actual quote, most likely would not, but just not to be concerned that I would recognize this as a quote even though it does not have quotation marks around it. So this is an example of non-plagiarism. Now let's look at another example. In this particular example, we see one little area that got highlighted and it's labeled with number 6. So if I asked you to interpret this, your first step should be to think about, okay, do we have 7 or more words stringed together? In this case, we do not. This has less than 7 words, and we do not have any scattered highlighted areas around it to indicate that this paraphrase needs to be improved, such as in the previous example that we just looked at. So if you look at the actual wording, this area right here, low LET radiation, this is an actual, it's a term that cannot be paraphrased. It's a type of radiation, and therefore you cannot state it differently. So if you want to say that somebody received low dose of low LET radiation, it is pretty impossible to paraphrase that better. So it is okay to leave this area as is because it is not plagiarized. It does not have 7 words. If it had 7 words, we would have to put quotes around it. We also need to make sure that we have proper in-text citations. Now, note that the student did provide in-text citations here at the end. So the student is giving credit to this author, but not immediately after the highlighted area. Now, this is acceptable if the sentence that follows the match area is also from the same source. So this is correct formatting practice, as you are supposed to place your in-text citations at the end of the paraphrased material. In most instances, that will include more than one sentence. So in other words, you do not need to have a citation after every single sentence when they come from the same source. Only if each sentence is from various sources, then you give credit to their respective authors. So this is an example of non-plagiarism. Let's go to the next example, and actually our last example for this instructional video. So in this last example, I just wanted to bring up that your reference page will most likely be highlighted, and all or most of your sources will be highlighted in Turnitin Reports. Now this is perfectly normal and it's acceptable because these articles, these sources, and especially peer-reviewed articles, which is what you would want to cite in your research paper because those are reliable sources, those have been most likely referenced before by other students or in other publications. So Turnitin database would have these references somewhere in other articles or other papers. So you can disregard the reference page, and you should not be concerned with highlighted areas in this section of your paper. And now that brings us to the end of this video instruction. Next, I invite you to open up the word-for-word plagiarism examples video, in which we will go through some more examples that will contain plagiarism, and we will interpret those areas and talk about how you can correct them.